before we dive into the dark, twisted, and occasionally, what the actual hell side of humanity. Here's a quick note from our imaginary legal team, which consists of a sleep-deprived parent, Google, and a stress ball named Greg. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes. Yes. Both. It's just me, researching these cases like your overly invested ex creeping your socials, thoroughly, obsessively, and with just a hint of judgment. The opinions here are entirely my own and do not represent law enforcement, lawyers, doctors, or your cousin Karen who thinks she's a detective because she binged 4 crime docs and made a Pinterest board. Also, everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, even if the vibes are giving that, yep, they did it. And no, I'm not a licensed psychologist or a doctor, just someone with a brain full of psychology textbooks, way too much coffee, and disturbing level of curiosity. And sometimes, there's a handsome guy who's mostly here for the snacks and the dramatic one-liners. So do your own research. I'm here for insight, empathy, and storytelling. Full disclaimers in the episode description.
Hey guys, if you're new here, welcome to my little corner of chaos. I'm Rachel, and I host Crime Unleashed with frequent appearances from my husband and other brave souls I can rope in along the way. This is what I do at night instead of sleeping, like normal people. So, you bring the snacks, your blanket, and your favorite drink, and I'll open the case file. Let's jump in. Imagine being locked in a coffin-sized box under someone's bed. Not for a night, not for a week, not even for months, but for 7 years. No light, no voice, no escape, and sometimes 23 hours a day for years. She was taken by a seemingly normal couple, a family even, but what they did to her inside that house was anything but normal. Torture, control, a fake cult, a slave contract. And here's something just as horrifying. She wasn't there first. This isn't fiction. This is what happened. And tonight, you'll hear every terrifying detail. Welcome to Crime Unleashed. All right, guys, this one is a doozy, we'll say. This one is an insane story, actually. When I was researching it, I was just completely, honestly shocked because I honestly do not know if I could handle it. And if you really, as I'm telling the story, I mean, put yourself in her spot because it's so sad, so terrifying. I mean, it's just crazy. And I feel claustrophobic just even telling the story. So, born on December 31st, 1956, Colleen Stan was the kind of 20-year-old who didn't scare easy. Not because she was reckless. She was smart. She was sharp, a little stubborn maybe, but she was the kind of girl who knew what she wanted and figured out how to get there. And in 1977, sometimes that meant sticking your thumb out on the side of the road and trusting your gut. Colleen had done this before. Hitchhiking wasn't as taboo as it is now. True crime wasn't a genre. It was just something that happened to, quote, other people. She wasn't naive about it either. She knew the risks. She could read people, feel the vibe, and say, nope, when something felt off. And she'd already passed up 2 rides that day. One was a car full of guys that gave off that kind of vibe women don't need to explain because, well, you just know. Then came another car, which, again, she felt that vibe, she let it go. Then came the blue Dodge Colt, a husband, a wife, a baby. a clean-cut man, a soft-spoken woman, a baby in the car seat or back seat or on her lap. I'm not really sure on that part. It looked like a little picture of domestic safety rolling down I-5. If you're wondering what a predator disguise looks like in the wild, this would not look like it. Or so you think. That's the part that still punches me in the gut because it worked. The image of normalcy was enough to lower her guard, enough to make her think, this one feels okay. It wasn't about bad judgment on her part. This was about someone using the illusion of normalcy and using it as a weapon. See, she was about 100 miles from her destination in Westwood, California. She already made it 350 miles, so she was so close. She was going to surprise her friend, and she was almost there. But she got in that car. The one choice, a blink, a breath, a step into what seemed safe became the moment her life split in two. What followed would be one of the most disturbing cases of long-term captivity ever recorded. But here's the thing I want you to remember about Colleen. She was not just a victim, she was a survivor, and of something, most people couldn't endure for a week, let alone 7 years. Because the couple in that car, Cameron and Janice Hooker, they weren't just your average weirdos. Cameron was a deeply disturbed man with fantasies darker than most people can stomach. And Janice, well, she was complicit in more ways than one. At first, Colleen didn't feel like there was anything to worry about. The couple seemed nice, they seemed normal enough, and there was even a baby in the car. How dangerous could they really be? But sometimes fear doesn't hit like a scream. Sometimes it creeps in like a whisper. A little knot in your gut, a flicker of something you can't name just yet, but your nervous system just kind of picks it up, loud and clear. For Colleen, that whisper grew louder when they stopped at a gas station. She went to the bathroom, looked at the window, thought for a brief moment about climbing out that window and just running. No explanation, just gone. And I wish that she would have. But she didn't, because what kind of person jumps out of the window to escape a family road trip, right? She actually ignored that feeling. And like most of us are taught to do, she got back into that car. And then things got real. See, Cameron, out of nowhere, pulled off into a dirt road or onto a dirt road, and he told them they were going to go sightseeing. They were going to go look at something about the caves, because nothing says fun family detour like an unannounced off-grid cave crawl. But seriously, he pulled off and he was like, they're just going to go hiking, sightseeing, whatever. Janice got out with the baby and started walking down the hill toward a lake, and Colleen, she actually just stayed behind. She let them do their thing, and that's when it all shifted. Cameron came around to the back of the car and held a knife to her throat. Just like that, he ordered her to put on something that sounds like it came out of a horror movie. A head box. Yes, a box for her head. But not just any box. He actually made this box, by the way. This was a 20-pound homemade isolation chamber. It was designed to block light, block sound, restrict airflow, and it wasn't just a physical device. It was the beginning of a full psychological warfare. He blindfolded her first, tied her up, and then slipped that box over her head. He even locked it. And then Janice got in the car and they just drove off. Like nothing happened. Like they hadn't just stolen someone's freedom and locked it inside a plywood of darkness. Now, some stories say that they actually stopped and got food. I've only found that in one article, and I just cannot fathom them stopping for food and her sitting in the car with a box over her head and nobody seeing it. So I don't know about that. But All of this wasn't spontaneous for the hookers. It wasn't random. It wasn't some heat of the moment mistake. They were hunting. They had been hunting. So, let me give you a little backstory. Janice Hooker met Cameron in 1973 when she was just about 16 years old. And like so many young girls raised without strong boundaries or warned about how manipulation really works, she thought he was charming, kind, safe. In fact, she was raised in a very safe home, but they didn't talk about these things. In fact, most people in that era didn't really talk about these things with their kids, especially 16-year-old. They know what they're doing, and that's even to this day. But back then, it really just, quote, didn't happen to them or to their family or to their child. So it wasn't talked about, and so she was pretty much naive to the world of what it could be. And honestly, this is why I know this sounds bad, but I instilled in my kids' head, do not trust anyone, because you do not know anyone in this world. So they got married 2 years later. So she was 18. And very quickly, the man, Cameron, she thought that she married turned into something entirely different. He had a sadistic side, sadistic desires. He was violent, controlling, obsessed with bondage and domination, but not in any consensual, safe, and adult way. This wasn't kink. This wasn't anything like that. This was cruelty. This was obsession with ownership. He always wanted to hurt her, she said. He would even take her into the woods and hang her from a tree with leather wrist straps. He would whip her and beat her, and some articles say that head box was built for her originally. Cameron wanted a slave, not a partner. And Janice, well, she gave in. At first because she was afraid, but then eventually because she bought into it. She bought into his words. And I don't know how, but I do know psychologically this is a fact. This is something that does happen over time. And it's just truly sad, because throwing it out there, nobody should have to go through this or live through this. When the beatings got so violent that Janice couldn't take it anymore, and let's be honest, we're not talking about rough sex or kink here. We are talking about full-blown assault. She finally said no more. She didn't want to be part of any of that anymore. However, she still wanted to be married to Cameron. But Cameron, he still had his cravings. And instead of walking away or turning him in or, choosing a different life altogether, Janice made a deal. A horrifying deal, but it was their deal. She agreed to let her husband kidnap another woman to take her place in the abuse, as long as he didn't have sex with her. So, by the time they picked up Colleen's stand, this wasn't a twisted fantasy anymore. It was a plan. It was set up they hunted this poor girl, or any girl. They were actively looking for someone to abduct, and they prepared for it. Colleen didn't just fall into the wrong car. She was targeted by people who had built their own world of delusion and domination, and she was about to disappear into it. But let me pause here. That was the boundary. Let me repeat this. Janice agreed to let her husband kidnap another woman to take her place in abuse, as long as he didn't have sex with her. That was the boundary. Not the violence, not the kidnapping, not the trauma, not any of that. That didn't step over the boundary. The boundary was just no sex. That is insane. But this is how warped things had become in their household. Where abuse was normalized and human life was treated like a bargaining chip. And as you can imagine, Cameron was thrilled with this agreement, because why wouldn't a man with sadistic desires be ecstatic about a setup where he could have his pie and eat it too? So, in 1976, a full year before Colleen Stan ever crossed their path, they went out to look for someone, like a predator at a mall. It was January 31st, 1976. Around 4 in the afternoon, when they drove to Chico, California, they spotted a young girl walking down the street. Her name was Marie Elizabeth Spanhaki, and I do not know if I said that right, and I apologize. I apologize if I did not. She was 18 years old, just a teenager. Marie had just gotten into a fight with her fiance. Nothing dramatic or anything, just one of those normal couple arguments. She stepped out to take a walk, a breather, cool off. I mean, I do it all the time. My husband does it too. So she stepped outside to take a breather, and that's when Cameron and Janice rolled up in their car and asked her if she needed a ride. They weren't threatening, just a couple, just being helpful. And Marie, unaware she was being stalked by people with premeditated violent intentions, she accepted. They actually drove her all the way to her destination, which was the corner of Rio Lindo Avenue and Parmac Road. Probably said that wrong too. And they almost let her out. Almost. But then Cameron grabbed her wrist, yanked her back in. And just like that, 1 second she was about to open the door, get out, be safe. The next, she was locked inside a nightmare. They headed toward their home, the same direction Colleen would be taken later, but this time Cameron had already made plans. He stopped the car. He pulled out that same homemade head box that he had built, I guess, for Janice. The same 20-pound sensory deprivation device that blocks light, sound, air, any sense of control. And he put it over Marie's head. I will be honest with you, it is hard for me to understand how Janice could stay with a man like that, let alone love him, let alone agree to sacrifice another human being just to protect her own spot at his side. Now, I do understand the psychological part, the psychology of, all of that. We could talk about trauma bonding, grooming, about the fear of, about fear disguised as loyalty, but even through all of that, it's just hard to comprehend how someone could become so numb to the suffering of another woman just to keep their own warped version of love intact. And that's what happened. It is hard to be empathetic to Janice when she is allowing this. That is my personal opinion. But, and I understand that there is, they say, reasons behind all of this psychologically, but again, it's just so hard. I've never been in that position. Don't plan to be, but it's just hard. So Marie was never seen again after this, and her body was actually never recovered. But I am going to tell you her story. Her story is often overshadowed by Colleen's, but she was real. She did matter, and she was the first. Both of them, Colleen and Marie, matter. So we'll be talking about both. Now, yes, Janice is the one who eventually turned Cameron in. Years later, she's the one who told the police about what they did to Marie Spanhaki. But let me ask you something. You tell me how you feel about the consequences she faced in the end. Because I have feelings. I do have feelings about it. But I want to hear what you feel about it in the end. So here's what we know, though. They brought Marie to their home on Oak Street. When they arrived, Janice and Marie stayed in the car while Cameron went inside to, quote, get things ready. According to Janice, Marie was crying, screaming, completely panicked. And Janice, who already knew exactly what kind of man she married, had the audacity to look at her in a box and say, everything will be okay. And I don't know about you, but that line makes me sick. It makes my skin crawl because Janice knew. Maybe not to the full extent, maybe not every gory detail, but she knew. This wasn't going to be a conversation over tea and, I don't know, closure. This was a setup. Cameron took Marie into the basement. Janice says she stayed upstairs, crying on the couch, which is somehow supposed to make this all better. And also, I do not know if I believe that. And I think you might understand when I get to Colleen's story. Janice says she didn't witness it firsthand, but she admits Marie was naked, and that at some point Cameron dragged her to the upstairs bathroom. Why? Because he had tried to cut her vocal cords. Yes, he mutilated her throat to stop her from screaming, but he did it wrong, and she started bleeding out badly. And here's the part that just infuriates me. He asked Janice to bring him a towel to hold to Marie's neck. So Janice knew the girl had just been tortured. She knew that Cameron was doing something, and she still participated, even if it was just under the guise of, quote, helping. I mean, no, she is in full blame here. And of course, the towel didn't work. So Cameron took Marie back down to the basement and continued the abuse. At some point, he came back upstairs and asked for a pen and paper. Since she couldn't speak, he was going to let her write instead. I'm just, ugh. So when he returned with the note, Janice said it read something like, "I'll give you anything you want if you let me go." And that line broke me when I read it. I honestly, saying it out loud still gives me chills. This wasn't just a plea, it was a teenager, bleeding, voiceless, stripped of her safety and future, still trying to reason with her abuser, still trying to survive. And according to Janice, the next time Cameron came upstairs, it was to tell her Marie was dead. He said he'd shot her twice in the stomach and then strangled her. He asked Janice to help him, quote, take care of it. So she brought him a blanket, and together they drove to Lassen Park to bury her body. After that, Janice claims that she, quote, lay in bed for weeks, so sick. And you know what? Maybe she was sick, but not just with guilt or trauma. She had to be sick from the weight of her choices, sick from being an accomplice to murder that she could have stopped. And I don't say that lightly. I know trauma complicates things. I know that there are layers to psychological abuse, coercion, manipulation, but there comes a point, especially when someone's screaming for help in the car, bleeding out in your bathroom, there comes a point where you either help the victim or you become part of the crime. Janice became part of it, and to this day, I still wrestle with how little she truly paid for it. If she even paid for it, I don't know. But it's to me, I don't know what she was. I don't know if I believe that she was sick and laid in bed for weeks. I don't know. So Marie Spanhockey, her case actually was left as an unsolved case for years. Now, back to Colleen, back to May of 1977. It was a year later, the hookers found Colleen. Colleen Stan had no idea that when she got into that car, her entire identity, her entire world, her freedom, her voice, her humanity was about to be stripped away. Later, she described the moment with chilling simplicity. Quote, "The husband looked dirty, like he just got off of work," Stan recalled. "His young wife was holding their baby. They told me, yeah, we'll give you a ride. And I felt this was a good ride. I felt like a safe ride after evaluating the situation." End quote. It was logical, calculated. She evaluated it. She was doing what women have done forever, reading the room, scanning for threats, trusting that instinct, that we're all taught to sharpen or taught to have. She couldn't have been more wrong in this case, though. Cameron kidnapped her almost immediately, and from that moment on, Colleen disappeared from the world. At first, he actually kept her in the basement of their home in Red Bluff, California, bound and naked, just like Marie. This wasn't just physical imprisonment, it was psychological breakdown in a slow motion. Quote from Stan, "I was terrified." Stan told Closer in 2009, "Janice watched as Cameron tortured me, and then they had sex in front of me. I was convinced they were going to kill me. I was tied up and put into a wooden box measuring 3 feet by 6 feet for the rest of the night." Please let that sink in. She wasn't just being tortured. And I immediately get claustrophobic thinking about this coffin. 3 feet by 6 feet. Measure that out. See what that gives you. She was being dehumanized, methodically, and with full cooperation from the woman who once said everything will be okay. The box Cameron used wasn't just a cage, it was a coffin-shaped sensory tomb, 3 feet wide, 6 feet long, just high enough to maybe partially bend her knees. There were, and this is also a quote, "There were many times I thought I was going to die," she said, "and many times I would think, why are they keeping me alive?" And I want to pause there again, because that question right there, that's the heartbreak of prolonged trauma. Why are they keeping me alive? That's not just fear, that's hopelessness. That is a person stripped of so much power, so much everything, that she begins to question whether she's alive for a reason or just alive for someone else's pleasure, entertainment, fantasies. Terrified at every second. So Colleen was terrified of what he might do to her next, so she obeyed every word. In the basement, Cameron told her to raise her hands. She did. Then he used a leather strap to tie her wrist to the overhead pipes. She was still blindfolded, but she could feel the shift. He was trembling. She could sense in the air the sick kind of anticipation that builds before something terrible happens. And as horrifying as it already was, that moment was just the beginning. Now, hanging by her wrist, her feet barely touching the floor, Colleen screamed, kicked, fought. But Cameron didn't flinch. In fact, he told her that apparently, and this was recorded in an article, but I only found it one time, but apparently he had said that go ahead and scream, or I will do what I did to the last person, which was cut out, or tried to cut out, the Marie's vocal cords. But again, he didn't flinch. He beat her, he electrocuted her, he whipped her, he burned her. She endured sexual assault in different ways, starvation, complete isolation, and psychological manipulation so extreme it could break almost anyone. I know that it would break me. I just feel like it would. This is so crazy. And here's the part that still gets me, because of that twisted little quote agreement between Cameron and Janice, which was, if you remember, no sex with Colleen. He would make Colleen watch while he and Janice had sex right in front of her. Now, eventually, like I said, she endured sex. Eventually, it does happen. But for a while, he kept that agreement with Janice. Like being tortured wasn't enough, she had to witness her captors getting off on her pain. And after all that, he didn't free her. He just changed positions. That same night, Cameron untied her from the ceiling and placed her into a new kind of horror. And real quick, just think about the thought of being untied from the ceiling after hanging, after being beaten, after all that, of hours of doing that. And what thought could cross your mind? I feel like it would be relief that you're being let down, but at the same time, you're so scared of what could happen in the next moment You just don't know, and my heart just breaks for her. As I mentioned, she was placed into that new kind of horror, and that was a locked wooden box. She couldn't move at all, except for that little tiny bit of movement with her, pulling her knees up just a tiny bit. He actually put the head box back on her in that box. And this is what it says, cutting off most of her senses and airflow. And when she started screaming, panicking, trying to breathe, he came back. Not with comfort, not with mercy, with a strap across her chest to restrict her breathing even more until she stopped making noise. Then he left her. He left her alone, trapped, barely breathing. And that night, Colleen thought she was going to die. And honestly, it would have made sense if she had, but somehow she didn't. Now here's where it gets even more twisted. Cameron and Janice had 2 young daughters, 2 children, living in that same house, and those girls had no idea that Colleen was being held captive. They didn't know she was living in a box under their bed. Eventually, they changed Colleen's name to Kay, and Colleen was allowed out for an hour or so, an hour or 2 a day, just long enough to actually clean their house or eventually babysit those same kids. Now, let me repeat that. She was tortured, she was enslaved, and they still expected her to babysit their kids. First of all, you're torturing a woman that you want to babysit your kids. Okay, I know that shouldn't be a surprise, but as a mother, I don't know. Colleen later said, anytime I was taken out of that box, I never knew what to expect. Fear of the unknown was always with me, and as I was kept in this dark, both physically and mentally, this dark place, I had no idea what was going on or what was going to happen. About 7 months into her captivity, Cameron introduced a new psychological weapon. He told Colleen about, quote, the Company, a fictional international organization that he said was watching her every move. Quote, he compared it to the mafia and said that if I ran away, they'd come and get me. This is what she told Closer. And again, quote, he told me I'd be nailed to a cross and left for days. And by then, I was so broken. I believed him, end quote. He said that they had her family's house bugged, that they were always listening, and more than anything, Colleen believed that if she tried to escape, they were going to hurt her family. That fear, that deep, conditioned psychological trauma kept her in line more effectively than any chain could ever in this case. Then came the contract. Not a metaphor, not a symbolic agreement, a literal legal style document that declared Colleen Stan to be the property of Cameron and Janice Hooker. And yes, she signed it because of fear. At that point, she was so psychologically broken, so fully conditioned through terror, deprivation, everything, that she believed this was her only chance at survival. And maybe it was. I mean, they had killed Marie, and she was still alive. I don't think she knew that they had already killed Marie. I doubt that they had said anything. In fact, I do remember reading that there was a picture, a photo that laid on Cameron's dresser, I think, and I might have put it in here, but there was a picture of a woman, and apparently from Janice, that was Marie, but they never talked about it with Colleen. From that moment on, though, the dynamic shifted, just not in the way you hoped. Now, she was officially their slave, so Cameron began rewarding obedience with what he called freedom. She was allowed to go for jogs, work in the garden, access other parts of the house to perform domestic chores. Sounds generous, right? Except she was still under complete control. If he said the word, she had to strip naked on command to be whipped. There was no warning, no reason, just punishment for the sake of power. Remember that pact Cameron and Janice made early on, the one where Cameron wasn't allowed to have sex with Colleen? Yeah, that didn't last. Eventually, he began raping her monthly, and Janice, who made the original no sex rule, didn't step in to stop it. She simply considered it cheating. Because nothing says stable marriage like trading a torture agreement and calling sexual violence infidelity. Their relationship was a disaster, all of its own. On and off, Janice would leave only to return every single time. And as their financial situation changed, so did Colleen's prison. When they downsized, she was moved into a trailer home and kept in another box beneath their bed. And I think they said even their water bed. I don't know. For a year, that happened. She was only allowed out to do chores. And no, the torture did not stop. According to the scare chamber, Cameron got creative. He built a stretching device, a makeshift rack that inflicted permanent damage to Colleen's back and shoulder. This man didn't just want to break her, he wanted to re-engineer her. And she was still so deep in her trauma that when she was finally allowed to visit her own family, which, insane, but she was finally allowed, she went along with all of it. Cameron went with her, pretending to be her boyfriend after all these years. Now, I think this was like 3 or 4 years later. Now, when she got there, Colleen didn't tell anyone the truth. She played the part. She smiled for a photo even with Cameron. Let her family believe that this was all voluntary. And her family, they thought she joined a cult. Because really, how else do you explain a daughter who shows up looking hollow, disconnected, doesn't call, doesn't ask for money, doesn't even say much at all? They were heartbroken, confused, and scared. So scared that if they pushed too hard, she might vanish forever. And you know what? I understand, because if you feel so scared that your daughter, you just won't ever get to see her again, you kind of walk on eggshells until you can get a grasp on what's going on. But back home though, Cameron, when they got back, he began to worry that he'd just given her too much freedom. So in classic abuser fashion, he had to show her who's boss. He slammed the doors shut again. He returned Colleen to that box, to the same wooden box under the waterbed, for what would become her coffin for the next 3 years. And he kept her there up to 23 hours a day. That is not a typo, 23 hours a day in total darkness, alone, breathing stale air. If she needed to use the bathroom, she was given a bedpan. There are pictures with a bedpan by her feet, and she had to position it under herself with her feet. She was fed scraps, denied basic hygiene, spoken to only in commands, and the temperatures in her box would reach over 100 in the summer. So Cameron controlled everything. When she could eat, sleep, move, relieve herself, he stripped her identity down to nothing, renaming her K, the letter K, and enforcing rules like a military dictator with a god complex. Investigators actually would later find that he had magazines stashed in the basement, his inspiration for new ways to hurt her. Oh my gosh. Honestly, I hate that there's even, I don't know. Colleen even remembered the sound of a camera shutter repeatedly believing that he was taking photographs of her torture and developing them in the basement darkroom. And even after 7 years with this couple, she still didn't know them. She didn't know much about them. Other than their names, she knew almost nothing except how to obey. That's what she knew. She wasn't treated like a person. She was treated like property. Collared, starved, silenced. And the worst part is this all happened behind closed doors in a normal-looking neighborhood with kids in the next room. That's how calculated Cameron Hooker and many of people like him, that's how calculated he was. He didn't just want a victim. He wanted a hidden world where he was king, where no one could stop him because no one could see. But things took another turn in 1983 when Colleen was allowed to get a part-time job as a cleaner in a nearby motel, which is total opposite, totally insane. So Colleen had been in captivity for 6 years by that point. That's not 6 days, that's not 6 months, that is 6 years of psychological, physical torture, of being silenced, boxed, renamed, broken down, reprogrammed even. But now, for the first time, she was allowed to get a part-time job cleaning at a nearby motel. A sliver of normalcy. A door cracked just slightly open. She was also reintroduced to the Hooker's children, as if nothing had ever happened, as if this was just part of her role. She was just gone for a little while, and now she's back. But even after all this time in control and silence, Cameron Hooker wanted more. And just to say, Colleen didn't escape. She was still fearful of what could happen to her family. He was that manipulative and she was that controlled. Apparently, having one enslaved woman, though, under his, waterbed, it just wasn't enough for him. He started driving around local neighborhoods with a camera, taking photos of girls and women he found attractive, essentially shopping for his next victim like he was browsing a catalog. And that was the final straw for Janice. Now, let me be clear. Janice was not the hero of this story, but she was unraveling. She was jealous. She was spiraling. And when Cameron told her he wanted to marry Colleen, Janice snapped. She went to her pastor. Yes, I said pastor because they were actually going to church and they were doing Bible studies with Colleen. Anyways, she went to her pastor, not the police, but she confessed everything. And to his credit, which I would hope that a pastor does this, but that pastor told her something she probably hadn't heard in a long time. Leave. Leave the house, leave the abuse. Tell Colleen the truth that, quote, the company wasn't real, that no one was watching, that her family wasn't being monitored, that she wasn't going to be crucified if she escaped. And Janice did. That was the moment, really, the spell broke. Colleen described it like this, quote, I didn't feel any anger towards Cameron or Janice while I was held captive. The only emotion I felt was terror, she told Closer. But once I started to feel safe again, that's when the anger came. And let me tell you, that is the moment trauma survivors will recognize. The second the fear lifts, the clarity rushes in. Colleen's mind had been unlocked. The invisible chains were now slipping away. And then, after that, she made a call. She picked up the phone after she had left the house. She called Cameron Hooker. I think he was at work. And she said, quote, I'm leaving and there's nothing you can do about it, end quote. Cameron broke down in tears. The man who was he built an entire fantasy world on domination and silence, sobbed when his captive told him she wasn't going to be back. She was walking away. But Janice still wasn't done confusing everyone. She asked Colleen not to say anything, just to keep it quiet. because she believed Cameron could still be rehabilitated. And Colleen did keep it quiet. But spoiler alert, Cameron could not be rehabilitated. A few months later, though, after Janice had gone back with him, she finally reported him to the police because that, she couldn't help him. And now comes the part that will infuriate you. Janice was granted immunity. That's right. She was granted immunity for all 7 years of knowing, assisting, covering up one of the most horrific long-term captivity cases in the U.S. history. In exchange, she testified against Cameron in what the media called the girl in the box trial. And during that process, she dropped another bombshell. Colleen Stan wasn't their first victim. As I mentioned, Janice claimed that back in 1976, she and Cameron picked up that 18-year-old Marie Elizabeth Spanahaki, brought her home, and that Cameron tortured and murdered her. Marie's body was never found, as I mentioned. However, neither Janice nor Cameron was ever prosecuted for her murder. So just to be clear, Janice just admitted to the police that they killed a girl and then they got away with it. Are you kidding me? This is why that just makes me so mad. In 1985, Cameron was finally convicted for what he did to Colleen, not Marie. He was found guilty of kidnapping, rape, sexual assault, and using a knife in an abduction. And the judge, Clarence Knight, sentenced him to 104 years in state prison. At sentencing, the judge called him the most dangerous psychopath I've ever encountered. And yet, I get this. The defense argued that Colleen's compliance meant the sex wasn't rape. They brought in a psychiatrist who compared Cameron's abuse to, wait for it, Marine boot camp. Like she was being toughened up for the battlefield, not tortured in a box. The judge wasn't having it. He cut through the nonsense and made it clear Colleen was not a willing participant. So again, he got 104 years in state prison. Now, Cameron was denied parole in 2016. But what about Janice? She claimed she was a victim too. And while I won't deny she was likely abused herself, the fact remains. She was never prosecuted. She lives free. And she refuses to talk about the case to this day. Colleen, on the other hand, didn't just survive. She rebuilt. She suffered permanent damage to her back and shoulders from that torture, but she returned home. She got extensive therapy. She married, had a daughter, and earned a degree in accounting. She even joined an organization to help other women escape abusive situations, which I find so beautiful. Colleen and Janice both changed their names, and they both still live in California, but they do not speak. And as of the most recent public records available, Cameron Hooker he's not been released. In March 2021, due to COVID prison reviews, Colleen Stan was notified that parole consideration was on the table for Hooker. This caused public outrage and serious concern. And then in September 2021, a hearing was scheduled to determine whether Hooker met the criteria for being classified as a sexually violent predator, SVP. If labeled an SVP, he would not be paroled. He'd be committed to a state hospital, indefinitely after serving his sentence. In June 2022, a San Mateo County Superior Court judge, say that fast, he ruled there was significant evidence to proceed to a jury trial to determine whether Hooker should be officially designated as SVP. He is still in custody, and as of the last official update, his case was moving toward a civil commitment hearing, not a parole, which basically means even if his prison sentence is up, if the court believes he's still too dangerous to walk free, especially due to this sexual violence or, predatory behavior, they can say, nope, you're not done yet, and then they commit him to a mental institution instead, not as punishment, but as public protection. And get this, unlike a prison sentence with a release date, civil commitment has no end date. He can stay locked up forever if the state proves he remains a danger. But if he finishes his sentence and the court or jury does not find him to be an SVP, then he walks free. No prison, no state hospital, no parole. He would be released back to the public. The man that, the one who kept a woman in a box under his bed for 7 years could actually walk out the front gate one day. Let that sink in for a second. Hooker was sentenced to 104 years for kidnapping and torturing Colleen Stan, but due to California's sentencing laws at the time and potential, quote, good behavior credits, he became eligible for parole consideration. That's why the SVP designation is so crucial. It's the only legal mechanism that, left to keep him locked away once the criminal sentence runs its course. If the SVP label doesn't stick, there's nothing stopping his release, other than public outrage and future violations, but legally he'd be done. And that's the kind of loophole that is absolutely terrifying. I can't even imagine what, Colleen goes through every day. All right, guys. Questions, my friends, and I want you to really think about this before answering. Think about the years of trauma, manipulation, fear, and the psychology of it all. But if someone helped torture and enslave another human being for 7 years, but later turned that abuser in, do they deserve immunity or justice? Would you forgive Janice Hooker, or should she have faced prison time? You know my answer. I've already kind of given it to you. She absolutely should have faced prison time, period. But I do want to hear what you have to say. The next question, imagine you're Colleen Stan. After 7 years of silence, obedience, brutal physical abuse, and psychological warfare, you finally walk free. What's the first thing you would say and or do to your captor or captors if you had one last chance and no fear? Now, I can guess, but I do want your answer, and I'm pretty clear. I feel like, I don't know, because you have to remember, she's been so scared, so fearful all this time, and then when she finally realized it was all a lie, yes, that fear kind of drops and the anger sets in, but to face a captor still is it's gotta be so scary, and to feel free is something that she does not want to give up. So that kind of like becoming invisible or disappearing and never seeing him again is something that might be for many people that direction. But for some people, it might be completely opposite, and you just, put them in the dirt. But head over to my socials and tell me. I'm reading every single one of your answers. Do not hold back. The case demands your voice. But okay, guys, so meet me here next week for another bizarre or terrifying crime. Can't wait to see ya. Bye.